Among the commanders who shaped the military history of the ancient Mediterranean world, Hannibal of Carthage occupies a position consistently examined by historians, strategists, and scholars. His campaigns during the Second Punic War, unfolding across the western Mediterranean in the 3rd century before the Common Era, are among the best documented military operations of antiquity, preserved through sources such as Polybius and Livy, as well as by later analyses shaped by archaeology and modern military studies. If you frequently encounter material related to ancient warfare, shifting imperial borders, or the strategic interactions between rival states, you may find this subject aligning naturally with the themes that draw your attention. To understand Hannibal's significance, it is necessary to situate him within the geopolitical landscape of the Western Mediterranean before the rise of Roman hegemony. Carthage, located in North Africa along the Gulf of Tunis, had established itself as a major maritime and commercial power, commanding extensive trade networks that stretched across the central and western Mediterranean. Its rivalry with the Roman Republic emerged not from sudden conflict, but from decades of competing economic interests, diplomatic negotiations, and shifting alliances with local powers in Sicily, Iberia, and North Africa. By the time Hannibal entered the historical record, the balance of power in the region was undergoing a profound transformation. Rome's expansion through the Italian peninsula and Carthage's influence in Iberia created a system of competing spheres, each supported by military forces organized according to distinct cultural and administrative traditions. The First Punic War had already demonstrated the magnitude of this rivalry, resulting in Roman control over Sicily and intensified competition across the western Mediterranean. Hannibal would inherit not only a military command, but a political legacy deeply interconnected with Carthage's struggle to maintain influence and autonomy. This introduction aims to establish the framework necessary for examining Hannibal from an academic perspective. It highlights his role within a complex period marked by territorial conflict, strategic innovation, and evolving state structures. The subsequent sections will explore the early years of his life, the internal mechanisms of the Carthaginian state, and the strategic developments that shaped one of the most ambitious military campaigns of the ancient world. The early life of Hannibal is known primarily through ancient authors such as Polybius and, to a lesser degree, Livy, whose accounts provide a framework for understanding the socio-political environment that shaped him. Born in the late 3rd century before the Common Era, Hannibal was the son of Hannibal Barca, a prominent Carthaginian commander whose military and political influence extended across North Africa and Iberia. The Barca family played a central role in Carthage's expansion into the Iberian Peninsula, forming a semi-autonomous power base that contributed significantly to the city's economic and military presence in the Western Mediterranean. Carthage itself, founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers, had developed into a sophisticated North African polity characterized by a mixed governmental structure, extensive maritime networks, and a multicultural population. The context in which Hannibal grew up combined elements of Punic, Berber, and Iberian influences, each contributing to the broader Carthaginian identity. This context underscores the complexity of the world that shaped the young commander's early experiences and later strategic decisions. The Iberian Peninsula served as a training ground for Carthaginian commanders of the Barca lineage. Archaeological findings in regions such as Cartagena, identified with ancient Carthago Nova, indicate the presence of fortified settlements, administrative buildings, and military infrastructure consistent with accounts of Carthaginian activity in the region. These sites reflect the environment in which Hannibal spent his formative years, exposed to both military operations and the administrative functions necessary to maintain control over diverse territories. Ancient authors describe Hannibal's upbringing as one deeply connected to the military campaigns of his father. While these accounts must be approached critically, they nonetheless illustrate the expectation that members of the Barca family would be integrated into Carthaginian military structures from an early age. This training occurred within a broader framework in which Carthage relied heavily on a combination of citizen forces, allied contingents, and recruited units from North Africa and Iberia. Such variability in troop composition would become a defining feature of Hannibal's later campaigns, especially during his operations in Italy. The geopolitical environment of Hannibal's youth also included the aftermath of the First Punic War, which reshaped power dynamics across the Mediterranean. The loss of Sicily to Rome, the rise of Roman naval strength, and shifting alliances in the western Mediterranean all contributed to a climate of continued tension. In this context, the expansion of Carthage's influence in Iberia represented both an economic opportunity and a strategic counterbalance to Roman growth. Hannibal's early exposure to these developments provided a foundation for understanding the emerging conflict that would later define his career. By situating Hannibal's early life within the broader cultural, political, and military structures of Carthage and Iberia, it becomes possible to examine how this environment informed his strategic perspective. The next stage of analysis involves the internal workings of Carthage itself, whose institutions, economic networks, and political debates shaped the conditions under which Hannibal assumed command. Understanding Hannibal's position within the Carthaginian state requires examining the political and administrative structures that defined Carthage during the 3rd century before the Common Era. Unlike the Roman Republic, whose institutions were documented extensively by contemporary authors, Carthage operated under a mixed system shaped by Phoenician traditions, commercial networks, and regional alliances across North Africa and the Western Mediterranean. Ancient writers, such as Aristotle, describe a political framework governed by elected magistrates, a council of elders, and influential families whose economic power influenced state policy. Carthage's economy, centered on maritime trade, agriculture, and extraction of resources from its North African hinterland, allowed the state to maintain an extensive diplomatic and military presence. Archaeological evidence from the region, including harbor installations, agricultural estates, and urban layers in Carthage and nearby settlements, attests to a prosperous society interconnected with trading networks reaching as far as Iberia, Sicily, Sardinia, and the Levant. These economic foundations supported the large-scale military operations that characterized the Punic Wars. The Carthaginian military differed significantly from that of Rome. Rather than relying primarily on citizen legions, Carthage employed a composite force structure consisting of North African infantry, Iberian warriors, Numidian cavalry, Libyan contingents, and various mercenary groups. This diverse composition required commanders to understand the strengths, limitations, and cultural distinctions of each unit type. Hannibal, having grown up in the multi-ethnic environment of Iberia, acquired familiarity with these forces long before assuming high command. Politically, Carthage was often marked by internal divisions between factions that favored commercial stability and those that supported territorial expansion. The Barca family belonged firmly to the latter group, promoting an assertive foreign policy in Iberia as a means of strengthening Carthage's strategic position following losses sustained during the First Punic War. The expansion into Iberia provided Carthage with manpower, mineral wealth, and strategic depth, resources that would later form the foundation of Hannibal's most ambitious operations. The relationship between Carthage and Rome during this period was defined by treaties that governed territorial limits, economic interactions, and spheres of influence. These agreements, documented by Polybius, reveal a delicate balance of power in which both states attempted to avoid open conflict while simultaneously seeking advantage across the Mediterranean. The growth of Carthaginian influence in Iberia and Rome's consolidation across the Italian peninsula placed increasing pressure on this balance, contributing to the conditions that would ignite the Second Punic War. Archaeological studies of Carthaginian fortifications, urban structures, and administrative installations help contextualize the political and military environment in which Hannibal operated. These findings illustrate a state capable of sustaining complex military undertakings, yet constrained by internal political debates and external pressures. Within this framework, Hannibal assumed command as part of a broader Carthaginian effort to reassert influence in the face of Roman expansion. With this institutional and geopolitical background established, it becomes possible to examine the strategic decisions that defined the initial phase of Hannibal's conflict with Rome, a development shaped by decades of tension and the evolving power structures of both states.
The strategic foundations of the Second Punic War emerged not from a sudden confrontation, but from structural tensions that had developed across the Western Mediterranean during the decades following the First Punic War. Carthage's loss of Sicily and the subsequent Roman acquisition of Sardinia and Corsica altered the geopolitical balance, placing increasing pressure on Carthaginian economic networks and limiting the state's maritime reach. In response, the Barcid leadership expanded into the Iberian Peninsula, transforming it into a base of operations that provided resources, manpower, and strategic depth. This expansion, documented by Polybius, formed the core of the long-term plan that would eventually shape Hannibal's actions. From a strategic perspective, the Carthaginian approach differed markedly from Roman doctrine. Whereas Rome relied on a system of citizen legions supported by allied contingents organized through treaties, Carthage constructed its military power through a coalition of forces drawn from diverse regions: Numidian cavalry, Iberian infantry, Balearic slingers, and North African units with distinct tactical capabilities. This structure required flexible command and a capacity to integrate culturally varied groups into coordinated operations. Hannibal's upbringing in Iberia placed him in a position to understand the strengths and limitations of these troops, providing him with a strategic advantage in mobilizing them effectively. At the heart of Hannibal's strategy was the recognition that a direct confrontation with Roman naval superiority would be disadvantageous. Instead of contesting control of the Western Mediterranean at sea, Hannibal adopted an overland approach, aimed at bypassing Roman defenses and striking where the Republic was most vulnerable. This strategic assessment aligned with the geographic realities of the period. Italy's northern frontier, defined by the Alps and the Po Valley, represented a zone where Rome's organizational system could be disrupted before it could fully mobilize its resources. The decision to initiate the conflict at Saguntum, an Iberian city under Rome's protection, reflected a calculated test of Roman resolve and diplomatic credibility. Polybius emphasizes that the siege of Saguntum signaled a shift from a period of constrained rivalry to open conflict, forcing the Roman Senate to respond. Hannibal's subsequent preparations involved securing Iberian loyalty, managing supply lines, and organizing the multi-ethnic army that would undertake the unprecedented march toward Italy. Strategically, the overland route through Gaul and across the Alps sought to achieve several objectives simultaneously. It avoided the Roman fleet, challenged Roman expectations, and aimed to bring new allies from Gallic tribes discontent with Roman influence. This approach also reflected an understanding of how shock, unpredictability, and psychological pressure could influence the balance of power. This alignment between geography, diplomacy, and military planning illustrates the sophistication of Hannibal's strategic thinking. Archaeological evidence from Iberian strongholds, Carthaginian administrative sites, and Gallic regions provides material context for the logistical scale of the undertaking. These findings demonstrate the networks of storage, fortification, and communication that supported Carthaginian operations across the peninsula. Modern studies of trade routes, animal transport, and mountain passes further highlight the complexity of the strategy Hannibal pursued. By examining these foundational elements, it becomes possible to understand how the decision to cross into Gaul and eventually traverse the Alps emerged not as an act of audacity alone, but as the culmination of a long-term Carthaginian strategic doctrine. The next stage involves analyzing the execution of that plan and the physical and geopolitical challenges encountered during the passage through the Alps. The decision to cross the Alps during the opening phase of the Second Punic War stands as one of the most frequently analyzed military undertakings of the ancient world. Understanding this event requires placing it within the broader geographic and logistical context of the Western Mediterranean in the 3rd century before the Common Era. Ancient authors, such as Polybius, provide descriptions of the march, though their accounts reflect both direct observation and interpretive reconstruction based on the strategic logic of the time. Hannibal's movement from Iberia into Gaul followed established routes used by traders, pastoral communities, and migrating groups. Archaeological and topographic studies of these regions indicate the presence of river crossings, fortified settlements, and seasonal pathways that informed the army's march northward. The composition of Hannibal's forces, including Iberian infantry, Numidian cavalry, North African troops, and pack animals, required careful coordination to maintain cohesion across varied terrain. The reliance on local supplies, combined with negotiated passage through certain Gallic territories, demonstrates the administrative and diplomatic dimension of the operation. The final approach to the Alps marked a transition from controlled logistical planning to extreme environmental difficulty. The mountain chain, extending across more than 1,000 kilometers, presented steep passes, unstable rock formations, and seasonal climatic hazards that shaped the nature of the crossing. Scholars continued to debate the exact route taken, with possibilities including the Col de la Traversette, the Col du Mangevert, and other high-altitude passes. Each proposed route is supported by geological studies, soil analyses, and reconstructed climate models that align with descriptions preserved in ancient narratives. Within this mountainous environment, Hannibal's troops faced challenges associated with altitude, narrow pathways, and the limited availability of forage. Polybius describes the necessity of securing safe passage through communities inhabiting the foothills, some of which offered cooperation while others resisted, forcing Hannibal to allocate resources to both negotiation and defense. The presence of war elephants, a feature often emphasized in later interpretations, complicated the march, but also served as a symbol of Carthaginian military capability. Modern studies suggest that their survival was limited, yet their inclusion highlights the diversity of the army and the logistical demands placed upon it. Archaeological research along proposed alpine routes has identified disturbances in soil layers, mineral traces consistent with pack animals, and remains of ancient pathways that may correspond to the movement of large numbers of troops. These findings, while incomplete, contribute to a clearer understanding of the environmental conditions encountered during the crossing. The combination of steep inclines, early winter conditions, and limited visibility illustrates the complexity of Hannibal's undertaking. The successful descent into the Po Valley represented not only a physical achievement, but a strategic transformation. Rome had not anticipated an invasion force entering Italy from the north via the Alpine passes, and the arrival of Hannibal's army altered the political and military landscape of the Italian peninsula. The transition from the crossing to the subsequent campaigns in Italy reflects the broader strategic design of Hannibal's approach, which relied on disrupting Roman expectations and exploiting geographic advantages.
The entry of Hannibal's forces into northern Italy following the descent from the Alps marked a turning point in the Second Punic War. The Po Valley, characterized by its fertile plains, river systems, and interconnected communities, provided a geographic setting vastly different from the mountainous terrain the army had just crossed. This environment offered both opportunities and challenges. Opportunities in the form of potential alliances with Gallic groups, discontent with Roman authority, and challenges stemming from Rome's capacity to mobilize troops rapidly across the Italian peninsula. Early engagements in the region highlighted the differing military doctrines of the two powers. Roman forces, organized into citizen legions supported by allied contingents, relied on standardized formations and a command structure shaped by republican institutions. Hannibal's army, by contrast, operated through a diverse coalition of Iberian, Numidian, North African, and Gallic units, each with distinct tactical capabilities. This diversity required flexible coordination, but also allowed Hannibal to adapt fluidly to shifting battlefield conditions. The battles at Trebia and Lake Trasimene demonstrated this adaptability. Ancient sources describe how Hannibal exploited environmental conditions, river crossings, fog, narrow terrain, and the predictability of Roman command decisions to secure decisive victories. These engagements illustrate a systematic approach that combined reconnaissance, manipulation of terrain, and timing to disrupt Roman deployments. Polybius, in particular, emphasizes the methodological character of Hannibal's tactics, presenting them not as isolated acts, but as components of a coherent military strategy. The subsequent engagement at Cannae in the year 216 before the Common Era remains one of the most thoroughly analyzed battles in world military history. Hannibal's double envelopment tactic, executed through the coordinated movement of infantry and cavalry, resulted in a catastrophic loss for the Roman Republic. Modern reconstructions and archaeological findings from the region help contextualize the scale of the event, reflecting both the magnitude of the battlefield and the organizational capacity required to implement such a maneuver. The battle's outcome had political and psychological consequences, prompting defections among some Italian communities and challenging Rome's confidence in its traditional military practices. Despite these victories, Hannibal's position in Italy remained constrained by the structural dynamics of Roman state organization. Rome's capacity to replenish its forces, reorganize its command structure, and leverage its extensive network of allied communities allowed it to absorb repeated losses. The Roman adoption of the Fabian strategy focused on attrition, avoidance of direct confrontation, and protection of supply routes reshaped the conflict into a prolonged campaign rather than a rapid collapse. Hannibal, operating far from Carthaginian administrative centers, faced increasing logistical challenges as the war extended over many years. Archaeological surveys across central and south Italy, including fortified sites and settlement patterns, provide insight into the broader landscape of the conflict. These findings illustrate the complexity of sustaining extended military operations across a region marked by variable terrain, shifting alliances, and expanding Roman influence. Hannibal's campaign in Italy, while marked by tactical brilliance, occurred within a strategic environment that ultimately favored the organizational resilience of the Roman Republic. With the Italian campaigns established, the next step involves examining Hannibal's tactical principles, elements that informed both his successes and the broader interpretations of his capabilities in ancient military scholarship.
Analyses of Hannibal's military command consistently emphasize the methodical nature of his tactics, which combined reconnaissance, adaptability, and the coordinated use of diverse troop types. Unlike the standardized Roman legionary structure, Hannibal operated with a multi-ethnic force whose components, Numidian cavalry, Iberian swordsmen, Libyan infantry, Balearic slingers, and Gallic contingents, each possessed distinct tactical roles. This diversity required precise integration, yet it also allowed Hannibal to construct flexible battlefield systems capable of responding to varied geographical and operational conditions. Antiquity's principal historian of the Punic Wars, Polybius, attributes Hannibal's effectiveness to his ability to extract advantage from terrain. At the Trebia, he manipulated winter conditions and concealed units along riverbanks. At Lake Trasimene, he used narrow pathways and morning fog to confine and disorient Roman forces. At Cannae, he exploited the open plains of Apulia to execute the double envelopment maneuver, an operation requiring exceptional discipline among infantry and coordinated pressure from cavalry positioned on both flanks. These engagements reflect a recurring pattern in which Hannibal initiated combat only under conditions shaped deliberately to offset Roman numerical superiority. Discipline within his composite army was maintained through a combination of experience, structured command hierarchies, and an understanding of each unit's cultural practices. Iberian and Gallic troops, known for fierce offensive capability, were often positioned where decisive engagement was expected, while Libyan infantry, trained similarly to Roman heavy infantry, provided stability and resilience. The Numidian cavalry, whose maneuverability was unmatched in the Western Mediterranean, functioned as a critical element in flanking operations, reconnaissance, and disruption of Roman auxiliary units. The coordination of these elements required tactical foresight and an ability to anticipate Roman responses. Another element central to Hannibal's tactical approach was the use of psychological and operational unpredictability. By choosing battlefields, timing engagements, and employing deceptive formations, he repeatedly forced Roman commanders into reactive positions. Polybius notes that this unpredictability disrupted the structured decision-making of the Roman command system, which traditionally relied on predictability and control. Hannibal's tactics thus challenged not only Roman formations, but the institutional logic behind Roman military organization. Modern military studies highlight the logistical underpinnings necessary for such tactics to function. The sustained mobility of cavalry operations, the deployment of specialized skirmishers, and the ability to adjust formations in response to terrain all required a logistical framework capable of supporting varied troop types. Archaeological findings from battle sites and surrounding regions indicate the presence of routes, supply chains, and local resource integration that facilitated these operations. The interplay between mobility, supply, and tactical execution underscores the systemic nature of Hannibal's approach. His tactics, while often decisive, existed within a broader strategic context shaped by time, geography, and the expanding organizational capacity of Rome. The resilience of the Roman Republic, supported by its ability to raise new legions and adapt its command structure, gradually shifted the balance of the conflict. Yet Hannibal's tactical innovations continue to occupy a central position in military scholarship, illustrating how a commander operating far from administrative centers could consistently generate asymmetrical advantages. With these tactical principles established, the examination transitions naturally toward Hannibal's broader historical legacy, how ancient and modern scholars interpret his achievements within the long continuum of Mediterranean military history.
Hannibal's legacy occupies a central place in the study of ancient military history, shaped by both contemporary accounts and the long tradition of historical interpretation that followed. Ancient authors such as Polybius, who sought to identify the structural causes of Roman dominance, placed Hannibal within a broader analytical framework focused on state institutions, military organization, and strategic decision-making. Livy, writing from a later Roman perspective, contributed narratives that emphasized both Rome's resilience and Hannibal's exceptional capability. These sources, while influenced by their cultural contexts, collectively attest to the profound impact of Hannibal's campaigns across the Mediterranean world. From a military perspective, Hannibal's operations in Italy, particularly the battles of Cannae, Trasimene, and Trebia, remain essential case studies in tactical innovation. Modern analyses in military academies and strategic literature frequently cite his use of terrain, double envelopment formations, and multi-ethnic integration as examples of adaptive battlefield leadership.
These interpretations situate Hannibal not merely as a Carthaginian commander, but as a figure whose tactical principles transcend his specific historical moment, informing broader discussions of maneuver warfare and asymmetric strategy. Hannibal's legacy also intersects with the political transformation of the Western Mediterranean. His challenge to Roman authority during the Second Punic War forced the Roman Republic to revise aspects of its military doctrine, expand its diplomatic networks, and restructure its command systems. These adaptations contributed to the long-term development of Roman imperial expansion, illustrating how the pressures generated by Hannibal's campaign influenced the evolution of Roman state power. Archaeological evidence from battle sites, Carthaginian settlements, and Roman administrative centers continues to refine scholarly understanding of the period. Excavations in areas associated with Hannibal's campaigns, ranging from Alpine routes to Italian plains, provide material data that contextualizes the logistical and environmental realities encountered by ancient armies. These findings contribute to a more precise reconstruction of the conditions under which Hannibal operated, reinforcing the analytical value of his campaigns in military historiography. At the cultural level, Hannibal's memory persisted across centuries in both Roman and post-Roman contexts. Roman authors often framed him as the most formidable adversary they encountered, a reflection of both respect and the necessity of understanding threats to the stability of the Republic. In later periods, Renaissance scholars, Enlightenment thinkers, and modern historians revisited Hannibal's campaigns to explore themes of leadership, state competition, and the dynamics of empire. His figure thus functions as a lens through which broader historical processes can be examined. While Carthage itself did not survive as a major power following the Punic Wars, Hannibal's reputation endured through the writings of ancient historians, the preservation of tactical analyses, and the continued interest of modern scholars. His career illustrates the complexity of warfare in the ancient Mediterranean and highlights the interplay between strategic ambition, environmental constraints, and the structural capacity of states. Through this lens, Hannibal stands as one of the most influential commanders of antiquity, his legacy shaped by both the victories he achieved and the larger historical transformations his actions helped accelerate.